Hello, everybody. So today we are talking about me, Orysya Bila from Lviv, Ukraine, and my colleague Josh Duclos from United States. We'll be talking about our article that recently was published in Studia Filosofica Estonica. It's a special issue on Russian-Ukrainian war, and we want to share with you our insights and thoughts, and to hear your reflections too. This is where, in thinking, in the public thinking, this is where really the philosophical ideas grow and develop, and we hope for fruitful dialogue. I will share my screen as a slide. Okay. All right. So my part, in our article, we actually went in a different order. Josh was first, his piece was first, and my piece was second. But we decided to do the presentation vice versa. So I will start with my presentation. Maybe we have to say that we met with Josh in 2023 in in the strangest way possible. Josh wrote a letter that he is a volunteer trying to help Ukrainian in some way. And he was looking for different ways, and one of that was his direct profession. He's also a lecturer of philosophy, and he was looking for some way to help in the universities. And the first time he came to Lviv, yeah, before, I suppose, on a different trip, but then he arrived to us in March, and we did some lecture, and then we started series of lectures, and we even did the course on utopia and dystopia, reading Huxley and Orwell, and also inviting students from different universities, all students that were really interested. It was open for everybody to do this course. And from that common experience of ours, we wrote this article. And this is our reflection on the role of philosophy and role of philosophy in war, and specifically in wartime Ukraine. My part has I was my thinking was developing in three stages. First, I will talk about how the war, the experience of this war, and this existential change that happened to us changed also our understanding, my understanding of what really teaching philosophy is about. Then I will show how it developed, and then um, what it can grow into, what our aspirations are, and maybe what are really, there are not only aspirations, but also warnings. I will start with this is the picture that you see actually is from my university. And the moment when the war started in February 22nd, it was the day when we had a big international philosophy conference in the city, in my university, and we we didn't know if we should go to the conference or what should we do, because like for many of you, being in the middle of the war was a new experience. So very clearly, soon we understood, and especially in philosophy department, that all these transcendental questions, all these big questions, it's very hard to talk about the meaning I don't know, of this of the ontology, or the role of transcendental qualities in God, to when you have when you are sitting in the bomb shelter, right? So it was like as if there is no place for talking high topics, important questions, important as if classically important, right? There was no place in this in the existential state of living in the shelter. Rather, there was one question that was part that has become a part of our life. That was a question of a biblical job. That is, why has this happened to us? What is that happened to us? And is there a reason? Is there something that we can grab? Kind of like we want to understand what happened to us in order to prevent it. In the same time, you probably remember this statement that was issued by a Russian University Rectors Union. And the statement, especially when you read it in the language it was written, it really resembles the language of the Soviet universities. For those of you who are not familiar with and cannot read Russian, you can see the text on your right, and on the left is the original. Университеты всегда были опорой государству. Наша приоритетная цель – служение России и развитие ее интеллектуального потенциала. И сейчас, как никогда, мы должны продемонстрировать уверенность и стойкость в условиях экономических и информационных атак, действительно сплотиться вокруг нашего президента своим примером, укрепляя в молодежи оптимистический дух и веру в силу разума, вселяя надежду на скорое наступление мира. Вместе мы великая сила. I don't know how about you, but when I read this statement, I had a flashback from my youth when I was a pioneer. And from this moment when our schools were very ideologically filled with the ideas of the bright future that the Soviet Union is developing into. And I thought about this, that actually education and higher education, philosophy, humanities, history is really important in this war. They are becoming part of our they are becoming the part of the war. They are becoming the instruments of the war. And I remember that actually in the Soviet Union there was even tradition that especially the departments of history and departments of philosophy, that you have to be really careful who can get into the university, into philosophy departments. There was a pre-selection. If you are clear, if you have this how would I call this? The clearance for the regime. For example, in Lviv, to get into the history department or philosophy department, you had to go through the checkup of the documents. Like if you don't have any parents or grandparents who were in prisons or were against the regime, or so. Humanities were extremely important for this system. In the same way, the type of a philosophy that was searching for truth and freedom was there in the Soviet Union, but it developed as a almost like underground philosophy. How was it developing? It was developing in two different ways. First was that there was the Ezop language, Ezopivska mova, Ezopian language, through searching the, like for example, Igor Kohn was sharing his memories about how he wanted to read Hume and 18th century philosophy. He said he will he will fight with the bourgeois philosophy. So this is the way for him to receive a permission from dean to get into the library and to read the originals. Otherwise, you will never be able to read the originals because the translations were very shortened, and then they were even improved, so to say. On the other hand, there were also the people who were philosophers, but they're not professional philosophers, but they lived and they were developing thinking, and this was the underground movement and the representative of so-called 60s. And Soviet regime suppressed them badly, and they ended up in the labor camps, like in Perm, um, and they this was this type of a philosophy developing in the camps, like with where you could meet really the intellectuals, thinkers, writers, poets, artists, and even painters who were just simply not agreeing with the way how the official state allowed them to see the world. They didn't agree with this perspective of the world. So why I'm talking about all of this? Um, okay, we have 10 minutes. Um, I was thinking about that. For us, what is this really being in philosophy for us in this moment? Uh, of course, of course, we see how the philosophy and history is being used by Russian side, but is there a place for us? What can we do with philosophy? And when we returned to the school, um, and we did this through the online classes, but also sometimes we met in the classrooms and had to run in the shelters whenever there were sirens. So I was reading philosophy with the students, and trying through these philosophical texts, this was our moment of trying to get into what really is happening around us. Philosophy became a space of thinking. And Hannah Arendt said in her Life of Mind, which I really admire, this is my one of the favorite texts of her, is that thinking is born out of paradox. And a moment of war, moment that we found ourselves at the beginning of the war, was a moment of paradox. And um, one of my biggest surprises was that when I was reading with my students, these are second year students of bachelor programs, we were reading Simone Weil, Gravity and Grace. And that's a text that is far away from the war. It's a text about how the evil entered our world, why there is evil. And for students, and I was really afraid that talking about evil will be really painful for my students. Many of them were from different parts of Ukraine. Many came from, I had also a student who was severely wounded. He was sitting in my class. He just arrived from Kharkiv. So I was wondering if this is not going to be a re-traumatization for them. But then there is a moment in Simone Weil, she explains why the evil entered our world, and she says, God was so full, he's so good that he to let something happen like the world, he had to remove himself from like he he let uh, some kind of different space to enter in the world, being that something that different that is not him himself. And this is where, in this different space, this is also a space not only for the world, but where the evil begins, because God is so full and so perfect that when He removed Himself, this is where the all improper things also had place to start, because there was a space. Now there was a space where there was no was something different. And To my big surprise, this very simple but a philosophical explanation of the imperfection of the world was really this was really a game changer for my students. Many of them were are really religious students, really religious people, and for them, the question of the war was a question of why all this evil is happening? Where is God? Why we are not? What is happening here? Why we are not protected? And this philosophical piece, a small piece by Simone Weil, gave them an explanation that was also a consolation for them. That it's not only about that it's not only about that we. It's not our fault. It's the way how the world is, and this is also where in fact, actually, I from that class I had many. Now I have many fans of Simone Weil. They became reading her more and more, specifically because they found something that really helped them to survive that difficult moment in their lives. And now I'm time left. Okay, 5 more minutes. I will. I hope I will. Um, I want to talk both about humanities and about philosophy. What is there in philosophy and in humanities in general that is so important for us? Um, in the traditional Diltheian world, in the Diltheian division, there are sciences or the scholarship that is trying to discover the world, and the scholarship that is searching for the spirit. And Mikhail Epstein, in his Transformative Humanities Manifesto, um, gives the following explanation that in humanities, in philosophy also, the act of seeking knowledge is a process of self-transformation and self-creation, exactly because the subject for search is ourselves. So this research into ourselves, research into who we are, what we aspire, what is really important for us. This brings us to self-awareness, which leads in its turn to self-formation. And this also gives us the um, moral dimension, the moral component arises from the self-creating and self-aware nature of humanistic inquiry. So we are not really passive observers, but we also become active agents and changers of our lives. And what I think where the parallels are that in this war, what I see, Ukrainian nation become an active changer. We are really acquiring our subjectivity, our agency. It's a proper word, right, in English. We're acquiring our agency, but we also in like in this academic scholarship, in this philosophical inquiries, we are also um, receiving our agency by becoming a part, uh, but by including into the world ourselves, not as a passive observers, but an active changers. Uh, I want to remind here about I want to bring up here the book of my colleague, Mikhailo Minakov, Development and Dystopia. And this is about the transformations that happened in the post-Soviet Union in the post-Soviet area in the recent 30 years. And Minakov said something like that until recently, Ukraine represented a dystopia, a place where inner impulse of development fades out before it manages to set in motion irreversible changes. And, and part of that is that Ukraine has never been an agent of its own. Ukrainians never were agents. So they kind of um, we were living the life that was already predestined for us in a way by being part of a big empire. And I think, well, if we just want to mention here Oksana Zabushko book, how she called this, on the trip to Europe, the one that she wrote just at the beginning of the war. And she says that for Ukrainian scholars and Ukrainian academia, Ukrainian discourse was very much shaped by the language formed in the central power. And I think um, what happens with us today is that we have to reinvent this uh, new language for all of us. We are now in a state of analogy. According to Epstein, there are two types of creative evolution. Anomaly, when we have to depart from a given order, which we already did, and we are doing it also, but we're also in a state of analogy, and that is the state of construction of a new order. So my last statement here is that um, I also found it in Epstein's book, is that the idea of projective metaphysics, that what is really a fruitful time for all of us is the moment for developing of the alternative versions of the future. Um, and this is really a rich moment. And what I found also in my classrooms, that um, philosophy has this strong potential of always, of first, of the analytical ability to think, to understand what is happening to me and how I can change this, but also how can I develop what all we can develop into, where we become an active agents of this transformation. And this is what I really like about philosophy: its openness and its ability to help us to transform the world um, into some kind of a better version. I think this is a very strong potential that we have now. And this is where I will stop. Um, and give the word to Josh and stop my slide, and we will proceed.
Okay, give me one moment to open my slides. And oops. Is everyone able to see that, my screen?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for including me in this group. I'm grateful to be here. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you. I'm going to try and keep my remarks very brief. What I wrote about in the portion of the article that I wrote with Orysya is about philosophy as a democratic activity. And I speak about what it is to build a culture of philosophy and how this can be both reinforced by and reinforcing for a democratic society. And by a culture of philosophy, I don't mean one in which everybody reads Plato and Heidegger and Wittgenstein. That would be nice, but that's not what I mean by a culture of philosophy. I mean a culture in which people are more critical and less dogmatic, where they engage in collaborative inquiry, and the idea that you're participating in an inquiry that transcends time. And what I mean by that is I think philosophy as an activity is something that connects the past, the present, and the future. All philosophers owe a debt to past thinkers, and however brilliant we think our current ruminations are, no doubt some future thinker will improve upon or respond to or react to. So it really becomes an activity that transcends time. I'd like to give briefly five different ways in that I think doing philosophy can help promote a culture of democracy. And this is one of the reasons why I thought that perhaps teaching philosophy during wartime in Ukraine was valuable. So the first one is that philosophy teaches us a respect for reasons. And this is crucial to any democratic society. Philosophy is about arguments over assertions. Assertions are cheap. Anybody can make an assertion. Anybody can claim anything. What marks out philosophy is when there's arguments being exchanged. And I think the same is true in a democratic society. Discourse theories of democracy, for example, those by Jürgen Habermas, remind us that democracy is not simply about voting because you have the right to vote, but it's about exchanging reasons with your fellow citizens, meeting them in the public square and having difficult conversations about the true, the good, and the beautiful, and the direction that a state should take. And when democracy genuinely becomes a good faith exchange of reasons, I think it achieves one of its greatest ends, which is to promote genuine autonomy, allowing citizens to become the authors of the laws that they are subject to, because they are truly engaged in that process of deliberation and deliberative democracy. A uh, second way in which I think philosophy or a culture of philosophy can help promote democracy is by making us accustomed to reasonable disagreement. So I do not think that the scope of reasonable disagreement is limitless. I do think there is truth, but I think there is vast room for honest, reasonable disagreement. And philosophy shows us this again and again and again. Plato and Aristotle disagreed. Mengge and Zhengzhe disagreed. Elizabeth Anscombe and Simone de Beauvoir disagreed. Husserl, Heidegger, Patočka, and so on and so forth. My favorite example in the American context are the political philosophers John Rawls and Robert Nozick, who really could not have disagreed more about the nature of political justice. And they actually worked in the same philosophy department at Harvard for decades, productively. So, in a democracy, we're going to need to learn to disagree. And philosophy teaches people that that's not only possible, but it's often helpful. James Madison, the American president, statesman, one of the authors of the Federalist Papers, pointed out back in the late 18th century that democracy does tend towards factionalism. It's a feature of democracy. Now, if you're worried about factionalism, there's a couple ways to respond. One is to just crush the liberty that democracy provides, and you don't have to worry about factionalism. People no longer have the freedom to choose. Madison thought that was the wrong way to go. He thought that people in democracies needed to get comfortable with the idea that there would be disagreement and then create political systems and political solutions such that the disagreement doesn't become violent, doesn't become oppressive, doesn't become totalitarian, but in fact becomes productive. The third way that philosophy can help promote and enliven democracy is that teaching philosophy itself, I think, is a way of practicing civic virtue. That in a way you could say the medium is the message. As teachers of philosophy, the way we set up and conduct our classrooms can help promote certain democratic ideals. So, for example, if you happen to be teaching Hannah Arendt on the origins of totalitarianism, when I'm discussing with students her ideas about the role of the masses in a totalitarian society, something you can do is step out. You make them student citizens and you make them responsible for teaching each other. You say that your only role is going to be to moderate the discussion. You shift the power from yourself to the students, and they will be clumsy with this at first, but they will come to slowly learn how to collaborate, dissent respectfully, correct each other in helpful ways. Um, and in fact, I think they'll start to realize that the free inquiry that they're participating in is exemplifying why Arendt thinks free inquiry is so deadly to totalitarian societies. Fourth, philosophy encourages experimentation in thinking. And there's a phrase from the British philosopher Simon Blackburn that I'm very fond of. He likes to think of philosophy as conceptual engineering, seeing how different ideas hang together and work together. Now, all engineers, physical engineers, understand that experimentation is crucial. It cannot all be done from the armchair. And philosophy is fundamentally experimenting with ideas. So societies that are not willing to experiment with ideas or allow their citizens to experiment with ideas are going to stagnate and they're going to decline. And I simply don't know what better training there could be for citizens in experimenting with ideas than engaging with philosophy. That's the entire activity of philosophy. We should also remember that all action is informed by thought in some way, and free thinking will lead to free living. And finally, the last point I want to make about why or how philosophy can be useful in a democratic way is that it shows us that doubt is a virtue. Doubt is not to be feared. Doubt is not to be avoided. So there's a caricature of philosophy that we just doubt everything and we're endlessly skeptical and how do we know the external world exists? But I think that's an unfair caricature. Whatever disagreements people may have with Descartes, I think he was absolutely right to engage in a kind of methodological doubt. And getting individuals to be comfortable saying things like, "How do I know?" and "I'm not sure," is going to habituate us to a healthy kind of skepticism. Um, Recently in the United States, with friends, with colleagues, with citizens, and even with my students, I've been concerned by the credulity, the way in which people are quick to believe almost anything that they hear or that they read. And it strikes me that a healthy dose of skepticism, of just being ready to say, is that really true? And how do you know it's true? Is a very useful thing in a democratic society. And again, philosophy is going to accustom us to this. So the last thing I want to say when I wrap up is just to share what strikes me as a strange phenomenon. And I did write about this in my portion of the article. When I decided to try and do some volunteer work in Ukraine, and I was thinking about what to do and how to do it, and I shared this desire with friends and colleagues, I was shocked by the opposition that I received. And I received opposition by people on the political left and on the political right. So people on the right, perhaps this is more familiar, thought that I was something like a globalist stooge, or that I was falling for NATO's trick, or that I didn't understand that Putin had been forced into this war, and they didn't understand why I wanted to get involved. Perhaps more surprisingly, people on the left in the United States accused me of taking too much of an interest in a, quote, white problem, in a European problem. They also thought that perhaps I was participating in neo-imperialism and that as an American, I had no business getting involved in anyone else's affairs. Now, look, none of this made much sense to me, and all I was doing was trying to volunteer as a teacher. I wasn't making any grand political statement. But it is noteworthy, and I just thought perhaps worth sharing the view from America that while there is enormous and continued support for Ukraine and the people of Ukraine, there is persistent and very bizarre opposition that comes from both the right and the left. About a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, I attended the major Slavic Studies conference that happens in the United States, though it's really a global conference. It happened in Boston, Massachusetts, and meeting with a lot of friends and colleagues there. These are Slavic Studies scholars, though many of them Russianists. I was shocked and frankly disgusted by how many of them admitted privately that they frankly had no interest in what was happening in Ukraine and had no interest in supporting Ukraine or using any of their scholarly resources to support Ukraine. I don't quite have an explanation for this. I was shocked to hear it. It certainly doesn't account for everybody. You know, Timothy Snyder is arguably the most prominent a Slavic studies scholar in the United States, and he's in the news almost every day trying to make the case for Ukraine. But it was a surprising thing for me to hear at this conference. And then when people found out that I had been using my free time to do some volunteer work in Ukraine, um, there were a few angry responses, people thinking that I just shouldn't be involved. So I wanted to share that experience. I still don't quite know what to make of it. All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to unshare my slides now, and I will turn it back over to Orysya.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everybody. I think we can now proceed with the discussion, questions, maybe remarks.
Let's start our dialogue about this brilliant presentation, inspired and a result of the close cooperation, real close cooperation between Ukrainian and American philosophers. Please, Yaroslav, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. So you mentioned it is a topic of a paper of your boss. Yes, I would appreciate if you provide a reference. It would be very interesting to take a look. Yeah. So I have a comment, maybe, and maybe there is also a kind of question resulting from this comment. So the presentation was explicitly constructed or consisted of two parts. Yes, and here when I heard the presentation, I some kind of so I remember recalled. So also my training, my philosophical training, and let me explain. So the key word in the presentation of Orysya, as I saw it, it was consolation. So the consolation of philosophy, consolation. So it's we immediately remember about Boethius, consolation of philosophy, and why dysfunctional philosophy. How it works through explanation. So philosophy can explain us why all this happens, what is the free will, what is the nature of evil, and so on and so on. So consolation through explanation for us, the nature of things, as I see it. Yeah. And in Josh part, it was more active. So philosophy as a tool for establishing, I don't know, some rules of democracy, of practicing, conceptual engineering, action informed by thoughts, and so on and so on. And then immediately recalls me the famous thesis of Karl Marx, who also thesis on Feuerbach. So the philosophers, they tried to interpret or to explain world, but the point is to change it. So, and is it so that your vision of philosophy, especially in this wartime, is exactly this twofold? So the philosophy should, from one side, to explain these things and then somehow to change them. But Marx, they saw this first explanation function of philosophy as subordinary. So the main thing is to explain the world by means of philosophy. Would you agree with such a view? And is I right? Am I right with such a view on your common joint presentation?
Orysya, why don't you respond first?
Let me start and then you proceed. Okay. The word I actually I did not agree with the word of cancellation. This was coming from the editor of the issue. It was not I my the primary subchapter in the article that we wrote was on the use and abuse of philosophy, like in Nietzsche's essay on the use and abuse of history. And I thought, you know, with this rector's Russian rector's statement, this was clearly an abuse. And I was thinking about the use of philosophy. Is there a use of philosophy? Um, can philosophy be part of? Is this something that is really important for us? Is something that we should value, or it's just like it's if you probably remember a few years ago, not few, maybe already quite a number of years ago, many universities in Ukraine refused refused teaching philosophy in their departments. There was this all Soviet requirement that philosophy had to be everywhere. Like if you're an engineer, you have to study philosophy. If you are chemistry scholar, you have to study philosophy. Doesn't matter, you have to study philosophy everywhere, because philosophy was like this Marxist type of philosophy. And then all of a sudden everybody refused to study philosophy, and I thought, is there a place really for philosophy? Is there? Because in a way it was thought about it, it's very instrumental. So for me, I was thinking about the role of philosophy in the moment of this existential crisis, and I know what you mean when you talk about Boethius consolation, but I don't think this is really Boethius meaning that I use here. And what I also came in my thinking is that in a way, philosophy is explaining the world, but philosophy also helps to think about the new world. So, in the thinking, in the uh, public discussions, in searching for truth through this dialogues, through discussion, through thinking personally, and also in company with other people, we really are creating our future. So I see philosophy's role here. Uh, it's only consolation in that moment that actually helped to grasp the situation that we found ourselves in certain moment, a moment of crisis. In that sense, I meant it as a consolation. But I really was thinking about this role that the thinking, the public thinking, the courageous thinking, the search for truth has a place and should have a place in our lives, in that sense. Okay. Now, Josh, it's your turn.
I put a link to the special edition of Studia Philosophica Estonica in the chat, and here's a link specifically to our article that was also published on the American Philosophical Association website. But to your comments, thank you very much for those. I love that you brought up Marxist theses on Feuerbach. Because something I always keep in mind is Heidegger had his own response to Marx's theses on Feuerbach, which is to say, it all depends what you mean by the world, right? So if the point of philosophy is not to understand the world, but to change it, it still depends what you take to be the world. So at least personally, I certainly don't take it in the Marxist sense. When I was thinking about the article, and something I didn't mention is that I ended up writing this article with Orysya because I was being challenged by so many people at home. So many American friends and colleagues kept saying, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you flying to Germany flying to Poland, taking a bus to the border, and it forced me to actually think about why I was doing it. Um, I was uncomfortable just relying on the idea that philosophy just has some magical power that we should all respect. You know, the Socratic maxim that the unexamined life is not worth living. Maybe that's true, but I found that I would have a hard time saying that to students who had been forced to leave Kharkiv and then forced to leave Odessa and then whose family members had been killed. I wasn't sure I was comfortable saying that to them. So I was thinking about what philosophy had to offer in more practical terms, I suppose. And I did work from the assumption that a society that is democratic and has rule of law is valuable. It's not perfect. Democratic societies have endless flaws. My own country is a good example of that. But I was thinking, if I work from the assumption that a democratic system with the rule of law is valuable, what, if anything, can philosophy contribute to that? And I do think that healthy democratic citizenship requires a certain set of virtues. And so the claim I was hoping to make was that philosophy helps develop those virtues. Um, that you know, I won't repeat them all, but I think philosophy can be useful there. I will point out though that I did end my article by saying that I think there is an intrinsic value to philosophy that should never be forgotten. And as I shared with Orysya, I was surprised during my I guess 3 different trips I've made to teach in Ukraine, surprised by how infrequently students talk about the war. And I think there could be multiple explanations for this. Some of it, no doubt, is trauma, and they're not interested in reliving the trauma. But I really believe that part of it is when we start doing philosophy, they just want to do philosophy. They want to pursue truth, beauty, and goodness. They want to participate in the love of wisdom. And there is something just intrinsically valuable in that, wherever you are, whatever the circumstances of your country.
Thank you, thank you. And I would like to add that this link to article that we discussed now is in our invitation. You can find it in the list of the invitation. And who else? Hans Herbert Köhler, you would like to?
Yes. Okay, first of all, I want to thank you very much for these 2 very exciting talks, you know, for the parts you presented. And I want to develop sort of a question that is oriented at better understanding, you know, where your project leads. But I want to first share that I had a similar experience as George, because as some of you may know that I presented also in this forum and I published an article where I argue for an empathetic solidarity, sort of amazingly what George has displayed in his real actions for Ukraine, and I was challenged by the American left with a very similar rejections of somewhat buying into, as it seems, some of Putin's propaganda, and also being so. That was one of my explanations of why Americans and the American left is so unwilling to see the real danger and the obscenity and the moral scandals of what is happening to the Ukrainians, but because they were for decades entrenched in a war against the imperial United States, the empire as such. And it's almost like hard to believe, it's almost impossible for them to understand that there could be something worse, or that Putin is itself an imperial player, and that the left has to be open enough, so to speak. The dialectical or reflexive virtue that we would learn through philosophy is not a virtue that this left displays. And maybe, I mean, this is just my experience, and I would also like to encourage you to go to that special issue, because the discussions have very nicely laid out how, by some of the voices from that left, how dogmatic they are in their anti-US imperialism. But the real issue that I want to pursue is just maybe there is a third dimension that has not been articulated explicitly enough. And I also first thought that in Olga Bila's talk, that the consolation, okay, was not the focus, but it was certainly an issue of the theodicy and the explanation with Simone Weil of the existence of evil, and that I find personally that very existentially understandable, and it's sort of interesting and clear that students now see a sense for the evil in the world, but that I actually would also endorse, or rather endorse, a more secular analysis, and that philosophy, social philosophy, critical theory can lead one, or should lead one, to an understanding of the power practices and the challenges and the ideological schemes that are in place on the Russian side, and sort of the Timothy Snyder has been mentioned, and there are many others who analyze in depth sort of the evolution and the transition from the Soviet system. That also was a major issue in Olga's great talk, toward that new system and how it evolved, and how such a militant, in itself ideologically deeply steeped society with the Russian Orthodox Church can develop. But my question is basically about a third dimension of philosophy, because you have this existential dimension of making sense of the world. But in Olga Bila's talk, what was seen then to be the real urge that we should now engage in, for as Ukrainians, I mean, not we then, but the Ukrainians, or that would be on the agenda, is the developing a unique voice, and even shedding foreign influence, that was mentioned, and sort of developing, becoming an agency, creative, with regard to the Epstein model, and then the other theorist who was mentioned and who was collectively understood. And while this is very plausible, I found it very open, maybe too open, not normatively defined enough. That, what is this new voice? Is anything possible? Could that be a new collectivism? No. And that's sort of course, exactly where George's talk comes in. And in one sentence, and the answer to the previous question seemed to endorse that, it was basically understanding democracy mainly in terms of practices, as a virtue, in a sense, as a political virtue ethic, that in the philosophical classroom, like a sort of laboratory of instilling and practicing these values, can then both be a model for the world and also, so to speak, unleash subjects that are sufficiently open, fallible, self-critical, tolerant, and so on. My question is only, is not one term that's missing is here that philosophy, with all and in Josh's talk, there was also this litany of different thinkers who deeply disagree with other things. And there was a good understanding. I just share this here because it's maybe too obvious, or should be known, that I worked myself 7 years with Habermas, as a doctoral student, as an MA student first. And I developed my own approach to dialogue and power practices, and how dialogue can transform. But the real issue is that there is always a transcendence. There's always something universal within that dialogue. And so I would add philosophy, Ukrainian, and let me go back to the issue with Olga. So the question to George would be, is not philosophy also teaching that while we are always engaged, while we disagree, while we engage in different viewpoints, the respect for the other in that dialogical engagement, that is itself a universal value. It's, so to speak, that we always come from different backgrounds, that no consensus is final, that we have all biases and partial views. That in itself is universal and should commit us to that practice. And in that sense, back to the Olga Bila's issue, and this is speaking now from my American and German. I now speak from Germany, by the way, where we also have a house and where I teach. I teach in Austria as well in the German-speaking world. The question is, what a lot of people outside of the Ukraine are afraid of is a new nationalism, that it's not so much the universal values of democracy that now emerge in the Ukraine, but that it's a new nationalism. And so that this new collective voice is not at all what we want. And in the discussion, in the reply to my essay, Olga Bila wrote a beautiful, much learned from her reply. But from the reply, for instance, by Hauke Bronkhorst, the leading critical theorist, there's the fear, and he basically paints on the walls that Ukraine will emerge as a new nationalistic 19th century country. And I hold against it, no, Ukraine is on the way toward mediating their concrete national history with universal values as expressed by philosophy. So these were several questions embedded in a longer commentary. Thank you for your consideration.
Orysya, would you like to respond for a few minutes? And then I apologize, but I'll again have to end the meeting very quickly, and then we can restart it.
Is that all right if we restart again in a few minutes? Because we have 3 minutes left. So, okay, I'll try to fit in this 2.5 minutes. I think there is this danger of philosophy, of this instrumental role of philosophy is always there. And we see that clearly, that in the big, I'm sure that in North Korea, like in the contemporary Russian academia, there is a strong philosophical background. And many academics work for that. And that is a real danger because philosophy is way too close to ideology. But for me, what I find the strength of philosophy is this ability for self-questioning. And I think this is a feature of the Socratic type of thinking, this self-questioning. But it's also what our colleague from Kiev, he's a former Russian philosopher. Допоможіть мені з прізвищем.
Ahutin.
Ahutin, yes, thank you. He in his book on creation of Homo Europaeus, he says that one of the main features of the European civilization that comes from the Socratic type of questioning, that is a questioning of oneself, always asking yourself, what is that really I doing? What meaning it has for me and how that goes with the world. That is my relation with the world. And I think, I don't know if this is really universal, but this is really, I would call this a European type of thinking. Yeah.
Can I answer very quickly? Because I, and Habermas himself recently, but I with colleagues from Vienna University and the universities some universities in the United States, we have worked on what is called the axial age, that this critical self-reflection that you mentioned has started actually at different points in the world by Buddha, by Confucius, by Zarathustra, by the Greek philosophers, the early Greek philosophers, yes, Socrates, but even earlier, the natural philosophers, and then in Judaism, by questioning God, by asking for the bond of God. So I think it's also important because that heritage of the European legacy has itself led to a lot of symbolic violence to dismantle and make inferior other cultures and other nations.
So I think, returning to our point, there is always a danger, of course. But what I see is the big possibility is that in this continuous self-questioning and also continuous discussion, allowing public space for the philosophy. This is where you are not saying what you're expected to say by somebody else in power or somebody, I don't know, whoever decides your life, right? But when you have a courage and also a voice. And for me, the philosophy is the space where you can think of, I think of the humans as an open project. And I think of Ukraine also as an open project. We can become anything. And we are fighting now Russia, which is clearly imperial, wants to be as part of them. But we can become uh, worse than that any moment. But this is exactly the question, is that we are open project. And that is meaning as long as we allow the free space, the threat for this becoming somebody really wrong is really, in what I see, is smaller and smaller. So about the normative, I don't know if I can now formulate some kind of normative um, outlines for all of this. I think one is the respect for human dignity is important, and the another one is this importance of freedom, as in Timothy Snyder's latest book, is freedom over everything, freedom over security, even over security, because freedom is the base for security. That's and I think we as Ukrainians don't know yet what we are, but we are, but I see the strength of ours is that it's an open project, and we will build this as the community as long as we allow as many voices in it as possible, and we just I don't know where we end, but I'm sure that.
Okay, I'm sorry, it's so on the table. I mean, and you sort of answer and you sort of not answer. But are you an open project that at some point you will not have this discursive space of reasons, the multiplicity of voices? No, that's what I'm saying. You should. I encourage you to make a more strong claim that yes, it's an open space, but the democratic virtues, they are not negotiable, or are they also negotiable? Is the openness foundational, or is the respect for other voices, minorities, people who disagree, who are different, people whom we cannot even imagine yet to recognize? Is that fundamental, or is the openness an openness for anything?
No, I think when the project of Ukraine was, I think the moment, really decisive moment for Ukraine was this place of Maidan of 2014, and this is where Ukrainians were saying Ukraine is Europe. And what Ukraine is Europe is not really about the space, but something that what really Ukraine is being Europe. What is this really about? And I think this is really, oh, whatever. This is the values, actually, the values of the freedom for everybody, the values of diversity, values of democratic participation, values of being able to decide for yourself, uh, like what kind of political party, what kind of political state you want to live, being agents of your lives. And for us now, well, this is I just recently I saw on YouTube a big discussion about what kind of project Ukrainians are striving for. Is this a national or it's a political state? And by national, meaning something like you said, 19th century. And one of the things that the discutants they also were philosophers. If I find, I will put it here in the chat. So one of the things that was found in the conversation, that actually we never were a single nation country. Ukraine is not a single nation country. So this we have a problem now with Russia. So we by trying to fight the Russian narratives, we're not really excluding Russians as the ethnicity, but we are trying to escape this the imperial language that was put on us. So we're trying kind of like to liberate ourselves from all the past that was hanging on us. But as the project of what kind of country we want. I mean, Europe is very different. All the countries that are part of the European nations that are Europe, they each of them has its own peculiar way of living, but there is something similar that makes them a European space. And I think this is what really is critical for us. But we are becoming agents of, and we deciding what kind of country we want to be, what kind of nation we are.
If I might just make a couple comments. Thank you very much for the questions. I perhaps should have said this at the beginning, but I'm very conscious that I am an outsider to Ukraine in every possible way. I'm an outsider to the language. I'm an outsider to the history. I'm not Ukrainian. I have no Ukrainian relatives. And so in no way do I think I have solutions for the philosophical or political turmoil of Ukraine. It's not for me to say. I have a deep opposition to violent, authoritarian, unjust wars, and I have a deep belief in the goodness of philosophy. But beyond that, what Ukraine and Ukrainians choose to do with their future is their business. I want to make one quick comment on the nationalism point. There is an article in the special edition that we've spoken about by a philosopher named Jonathan Wolff. He's a political philosopher at Oxford, and he writes an article about nationalism, dealing with this difficult point that nationalism has a nasty reputation and perhaps a nasty connotation, but there's different kinds of nationalism. The way he breaks it down, he describes four kinds that he calls purification, privilege, pride, and protection. And Wolff's argument is that when nationalism is about purification, getting rid of all the people who have the wrong blood, okay, that's not good. We're not interested in that. That's a dangerous form of nationalism. He even thinks when it's about privilege, that certain people deserve a greater privilege, a greater share of social goods, a greater share of the resources of society. He thinks that's perhaps not the right way to go. But pride and protection, his argument is this is not only legitimate, but valuable. That when nationalism is about a people or different groups of people being proud of who they are and making sure that they are represented both nationally and internationally, that's a valuable thing. And protection, that it may be the case that certain nations need to promote their own nationalism in order not to be gobbled up by dangerous neighbors, let us say. So anyway, I would that's Jonathan Wolff's article, but I would recommend it if people are interested.
Can I just have a quick follow-up? No, I completely agree with this answer. And this is a point I also made in the debate with others who were questioning sort of when you make a moral argument for solidarity, and you yourself are not related to Ukrainians, so you are actually making this empathetic move, to go there. You have that virtue that I was talking about in this other context. But when one makes then that move toward the national state context where all whole other nations or unities, alliances like the European Union or the United States of America commit major resources, sacrifice the lives of their own potentially, at least take resources away. The argument was that there should be additional reasons. And it seemed plausible that, I mean, if people are sort of now, if North Korea would now be attacked by China, there would be very much less sort of motivation to come to the aid of North Korea, even though there is this dimension of humanitarian aid already. And that is, of course, always an issue. But sort of this stronger aid that one supports the Ukrainian nation makes a very strong argument if precisely that self-understanding of Ukraine is one that is opposed to the Russian neo-imperialism and to this ideology of the one Russian mir, the essence of the Russians, and so on. And I just wanted to bring out that this is sort of outside of Ukraine. This is a major discussion among social theorists and among parts of the left who are very supportive of Ukraine and who criticize those old sort of US bashers. But I think your answer was perfectly adequate, you know, to explain that there are different types of nationalism. And it's actually a point I also made in response to this, Hauke Brunkhorst, that the Ukrainians sort of now, of course, because it's their sort of cultural identity is also at stake with the Russification that the Russians undertake in the new territories. So that, of course, their traditions, their language, their backgrounds, and so on, are a valid and vital project of resisting that Russian imperial force. Yeah. So thanks. So I don't know.
Thanks. Any questions, comments? We have one comment from Andrzej Bronk. I read. I repeat my remark, isn't that a paradox? The West is now evidently losing faith in democracy and even destroying it, and Ukraine sees now its salvation in democratic philosophy and democratic society. Have you some comments to this remark? Our speakers.
Orysya, I will let you respond to this.
I don't know if the West is losing faith in democracy. I think that democracy is receiving new. No, I would say I disagree that West is losing its faith in democracy. It's just that democracy is not as simple as we thought it is, we are, you know, I believe that with one of the most important things in democratic world is that we have to be open to changes. Sometimes the challenges come from inside. We see that clearly. We also see that democracy is really vulnerable. It has its weak points when there are like Russians, they corrupt a lot of politicians, not just Russians, but like democracy is vulnerable through economic forces, through political influences. We see that, but it's also a way to reevaluate what was taken for granted for many years as the safe and nice space that is unshakable, that will never be taken away. That is actually something that has to be valued and something that is worth to fight for because it can be lost easily. And it's a moment of being reminded again that it shouldn't be taken for granted, and it's something that has to be cherished and valued and also treated properly. And that is a part of efforts. It's not given to us, I don't know, from the heavens or whatever. And for Ukraine, also, it's a way to rediscover, you know, we received our independence as the gift, really. 30 years ago. In a sense, not that we were not worth it, we were worth it, but we didn't understand its value. It's kind of like the world changed, so we received what happened to us. But evidently, it's not that easy to become a democratic society, and we learn how to become one. And for Europe, it's also a way, because it was democratic for a very long time, and this democracy really needs treatment. So of course, it's a moment of challenge, but it's a moment of re-evaluation, rethinking who we are, what we really want from this world. And I don't think there is any, I mean, I cannot imagine anybody living in a free world who really wants to become a North Korea in any point soon. Not even how you call him, the president of Hungary. Not
Orban.
even him. Yeah, Orban, thank you.
The United States has 250 years of trying to get democracy right, or liberal democracy, learning and with countless mistakes along the way. I think democracy is messy, and some people see that as a bug, as a problem. Some people see it as a feature. I think actually um, the turmoil and the disagreement and the strife that often accompanies a democracy is a sign that it's working exactly in the right way. But to this point about is democracy in decline in the West, it's a difficult thing to know how to answer. Um, I'm sure all of you are familiar with what happened on January 6th, 2021 in the United States. A riot at the Capitol, an attempt to prevent President Biden from being sworn in as president. Here's the reason I'm bringing that up is there's something very interesting to notice about what happened on January 6th, 2021. Both sides, both groups of people, whether the people charging the Capitol or the people defending it, the people supporting Trump, the people opposing Trump, both groups claimed to be acting in the name of democracy. Now, perhaps that is cynical. Perhaps they were being dishonest, but I actually take them at their word. And so it's worth noting that democracy seems to be the one thing certain people in the United States can agree on, even if they disagree about how it ought to be realized. Now, on the other hand, certainly in academia, in political philosophy, in recent years, there have been more theorists explicitly arguing that liberal democracy has run its course. Jason Brennan, a philosopher at Georgetown, wrote a book. I think it's called The Case Against Democracy, arguing very seriously that democracy does not work very well. Patrick Deneen, his argument, Patrick Deneen is a political philosopher at the University of Notre Dame. He wrote a book called Why Liberalism Failed, and then very recently published a book called Regime Change. And he's not so much arguing against democracy as against the liberalism, the liberal society. So I would say in the population at large, at least in the United States, democracy remains an axiomatic truth. We take it as given that democracy is good, but there are movements, political and philosophical and academic, increasingly people saying this just doesn't work anymore.
Thanks. Evgenia Ivanova, please, your question.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. And my questions to the Orysya. And Orysya you mentioned in your presentation the problem of old and new languages that we use. So if we can't use anymore the old language, if it doesn't work anymore, for example, you mentioned the word neutrality, what we can use instead is, because I have my experience, a conversation with my foreigner colleagues, and I faced on interesting opinions. So if we are Ukrainians, So we are not really good experts in the war problem because if we can't be neutral, therefore we can't be objective. And if we are not objective, we are not good experts. Our expertise is not really work here, and maybe we should listen like Timothy Snyder. We already mentioned him, and he's really good. And what do you think about this? And my questions not only about neutrality, but also about the new languages and what it could be appropriate in when we discuss our war, Ukrainian-Russian war. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Also, I also meet this question often. That if you are not neutral, you cannot be a good thinker. And I think there are two things that are mixed together, is that one is epistemological and another one is I don't know, moral maybe, or I don't know if this is moral, but maybe emotional. But I think, I mean, if you are engaged in a situation, I mean, not you or me personally, but in general, if we are engaged in a situation, and we take our stance, our position, why? I don't quite understand why it takes away from us the power of thinking. Why we are not able to think critically. Maybe we even think better than people because we see the situation from the inside. So for me, this statement is a bit puzzling. What really takes away our strengths to think critically if we're inside of the situation? Because we are angry at Russians. That's what I'm sorry, but I hear that often from German circles. Like, you are angry at Russians, so you cannot be really objective in your position.
It's exactly what I heard from some my colleagues also. So you're emotionally involved, or therefore you're not objective. So, and for me, it's not fair. And it's interesting what you think about is how we can argue and be the actors and be I don't know, the have a right to take part in all these discussions. So
I would say it's probably not very intellectually proper in a way, but I would say this is a way to gaslight Ukrainians. It's a way of saying you are unable to participate in our discussions because you are part of the problem. And I don't see this is true. This is just trying to push away, to sweep away the one of the sides. And for us, I don't think we need to prove anything. It's just if we participate, if we write and speak and discuss rationally, like we do this tonight, in every possible, на всех площадках, in all the circles that we participate in, conferences and writings and everywhere, where classrooms. If we do this rationally, there is no way to say that we are unable or not able to participate in the discussions. If you think that our argument does not work, please give me the reasonable explanation. I mean, give me an argument why I'm wrong. In what point, where was I wrong? Let's do the discussions. We are ready for the discussions. But to say that we are not able just because we are living in Ukraine and we're Ukrainians, this is, sorry, but that's gaslighting. That's what I see. I don't know. I don't have any complicated academic answer for that, just like that.
Well, there's justified and unjustified emotional responses as well. Anger can be a perfectly justifiable response. Righteous anger is in some cases the only appropriate response in a certain situation. If a person on the street grabs your child and punches him in the face and you feel no anger, no fear, there's something very wrong with you, in fact. So again, I'm not Ukrainian. This isn't a criticism that gets leveled at me. I get other criticisms, but um, what a strange thing to say that the arguments or the reflections of Ukrainians are tainted because they're appropriately angry. Um, just seems like a bad argument. A bad
Okay,
argument.
thank you very much. So just I want to add, so the question not about normal human reactions, but about the academic society, about academic discussion. So, and traditionally, yeah, we think we should be objective, we should be neutral, we need follow these principles and build our academic discussion on these principles. And this is questions about how stop involved emotions and is it possible, or if it's possible, how it's possible. Yeah, this is what about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for this active discussion. Any questions, comments? And maybe, you know, we have this interesting talking during 1.5 hour at the evening for us. Maybe are you tired? Maybe are you, do you want to think more about this discussion and to create personal opinion after this session? Any question? Maybe I would like to have a comment or questions. After yesterday, finished our annual winter philosophical school for high school students, for our who now after that they will enter to our university. And I tried to describe a beautiful program, Philosophy for Children, that was founded by Matthew Lipman in United States, and to discuss some points. And one of the points that was described by Matthew Lipman, it's a Socratic dialogue for the children, for the disciple of the school, and I tried to describe it, and after that questions from one participants of this school. Can you explain what does it mean, Socratic dialogue? Yeah, and I try to describe objectively, but I understand it's impossible without your involvement in this situation, without this undescribable step-by-step thinking, step-by-step understanding of each point of the thinking. And what my questions and my doubts, is it possible to describe in outside this philosophical maybe philosophic style of the philosophizing that you presented now, without involvement in the real situation of the dialogue with the students? My doubts and my question and my comment. And my comment in this, there may be dignity of philosophy now, how to remove these stereotypes, these maybe schablons about democracy, critical thinking, Socratic dialogues, because it sometimes it became stereotypes, sometimes it's a bullshit. This is my comment. Please, we don't
Josh,
listen, Josh.
Mike, yeah, Mike.
Sorry, Orysya, I think you should have the last word on this before we conclude.
Just want to thank everybody for listening to us tonight. Thank you for your time and for the interesting discussion. And I think, one of the valuable things about philosophy is that through this public dialogue, also here, is that we really changing the world around us and within us. And I hope that this. We are in the war now, right? And I mean this. The war happens not only with the weapons, but also through the discussions and debates and ideas. And I hope that at least for us tonight, this discussion that we had here maybe cleared a little bit of the window that we are looking through, but also helped us to be a bit more courageous and help each other in these times. And I hope that will also promote our thinking and develop into further discussions. And I really thank you, everybody here, especially to Professor Inna Holubovich and to my colleague Josh Duclos for this meeting to be able to happen, and for everybody who is here for this excellent conversation that we had tonight. Let's keep in touch and remember that the truth should prevail.
Yeah. Thanks everybody, and let's remind that this conversation wasn't possible without coordination with Yaroslav Shramko, Department of Philosophy, Kryvyi Rih Pedagogical University. Thank you so much for this evening that we devoted to philosophy. It's excellent. Maybe it's one of the best way for creation of new style of philosophy.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I am going to conclude the meeting. It was a privilege being here and listening to and speaking with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day, have a nice evening, have a nice and fruitful and peaceful new year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Inna. Thank you, everybody. Be safe.